Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever it is that you're tuning in from. This is season 2, episode 4 of our global international perspectives on the corpus technology for language learning seminar series, a joint initiative between the School of Languages and Cultures, University of Queensland, and the State University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. We have tonight a speaker Australia. As surprising as it is, we do have good corpus linguists here in Australia, though we tend to import them. They're not born and raised here. We have to wean Australians off the SFL first and convert them into corpus linguists. Essentially, it's what we have to do. But we have here today with us a kind of an honorary Aussie in Dr. Clarence Green, who's a senior lecturer at the School of Education for Federation University of Australia. And he's going to be presenting today on extensive reading and viewing for vocabulary growth and what insights corpus linguistics can provide into what is happening in this area. So you've all read the abstract in the build-up to the session, and a little bit about Clarence. He holds a PhD in linguistics from Melbourne and a Master of Applied Linguistics in TESOL. He's taught and published widely in corpus linguistics, first and second language acquisition, and many other things. He currently coordinates the Master of Specialist Teaching, Master of Education and Speech Pathology courses in the School of Education. He sits on the editorial board of the Journal of English for Academic Purposes, as well as the Asia Pacific Journal of Education. As with any public speaking event here in Australia, we'll begin by acknowledging the country, the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet. We pay our respects to their ancestors and descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country, while recognizing their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. So there you have it. That's it from me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Clarence, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'll just set up my screen here. Can you see my PowerPoint slides?
We can.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you for the warm introduction, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you everybody for coming along. So I guess Peter did a fairly good job of introducing me there. I'm a senior lecturer at the School of Education, Federation.
I'm sorry, can we, we're not able to view what you're seeing
okay.
on the screen. We just have the PowerPoint window, but not the slide. I think you may be in presenter mode or something.
Okay. All right, let me try this again.
Yep.
Is this better or the same thing?
It's the same thing. Are you doing it like this, or are you going in presenter mode?
I was going into presenter mode. I guess I can present like this if it's okay with everybody.
Should be okay. Is like, yeah. Let's just try it one more time on presenter mode. When you do it, we just kind of get a blue loading logo, but nothing else.
All right. Do you know a button perhaps that I'm not pressing?
I'm afraid not. I'll tell you what. Yeah, no, I'm not. That's not going to work. Okay. Tell you what. You just carry on, just in PowerPoint, and we'll try our best to read the slides.
Okay.
If that's all right.
Yeah, certainly can. It's not not ideal.
No, not ideal. It said press F5 maybe. Do you want to try that?
F5. F5 works?
It's not for us.
No. Okay, I see.
Unless maybe no, it's okay. I think it's just the way that we had something there. I don't know if you want to try that again. Do you want to try the open book icon at the bottom, perhaps? Or stop sharing and reshare?
Stop sharing and reshare.
Yeah, that might work.
Okay. All right.
Okay, Clarence, we're on.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for bearing with me there, team. So, okay, I'm going to talk this evening about extensive reading and viewing in relation to vocabulary growth, some insights from corpus linguistics, and in particular, corpus modeling and how we might use corpus linguistics to better understand the potential of extensive reading and extensive viewing for vocabulary. It's something that I think is particularly interesting and you know, a great avenue for research. Okay, so I guess I can skip this. Peter did a fantastic job of introducing me there. I'd just like to highlight that I am indeed a corpus linguist. It's just an absolutely fantastic methodology. I fell into it kind of by accident because it's one of those things that you sometimes get into because it helps you solve so many problems. So I was working on diachronic linguistics at the time, and there were questions I wanted to answer about language change, and corpus linguistics was the methodology to provide those insights for me. Since then, I've particularly focused on vocabulary, first and second language acquisition, literacy, psycholinguistics as well, some modeling in that area, and English grammar. I'm particularly interested also in corpus research in that K-12 space, so kindergarten to grade 12, below that tertiary level of EAP and TESOL and teacher training. I think that, you know, there's potential to do more room, do more work in that space of you know, mainstream K-12 teaching. So brief outline, I'll start by talking a little about vocabulary, and then I'll go into extensive reading and extensive viewing. I'll talk a little about incidental learning, contrast that somewhat with explicit intentional learning. Then I'll move into the main thrust of what I wanted to share with you tonight. Corpus modeling, extensive reading and extensive viewing as a source for vocabulary. And I'll talk a bit first about academic vocabulary, general academic vocabulary, and discipline-specific vocabulary. And then I'll build from there to talk about some corpus modeling work that's been published over the past 15 or so years that kind of tests or models, you know, how far might extensive reading get us towards an entire functional vocabulary through reading, through incidental learning. And there's some fantastic studies on that I want to share with you, the power of extensive reading, at least as simulated by corpus linguistics. So let's start with vocabulary. It's probably uncontroversial that it's of fundamental importance to second language acquisition and to first language acquisition. Part of the reason it's so important is, of course, because it correlates with comprehension. So the more words that you know, the more you're going to understand in a text, the more meaning you're going to be able to extract from that text. Possibly it may correlate with academic performance. We'd like to believe that, I think, because the more words you know, the better you are with vocabulary. You would think that would probably predict, you know, how well you do in schooling across a range of academic subjects, particularly the more literacy-based subjects, right? I'm hedging a little bit there because the research needs to be strengthened a little bit before we can definitely say that you know, vocabulary is a great predictor of academic performance, but it's promising so far. Vocabulary has import well beyond just comprehension and the academic context too. So in younger children, L1 or L2, there are relationships between vocabulary knowledge, breadth and depth, behavior, social skills, self-talk, self-monitoring, these kind of things. So there's a few questions that have been around for a while when it comes to investigations of vocabulary. One of them is, how much vocabulary do we need? And the answer to that is, often relative. So how much vocabulary do you need to be to hold a general conversation? How much vocabulary might you need to read tertiary level texts if you're a student in a tertiary institution? These kind of things. But we're interested certainly in perhaps a number, how much vocabulary will help us accomplish particular tasks that we want to achieve. Another question that we've been interested in for a long time is, what type of vocabulary do we need? And I'll circle back to that in a moment, in a few slides. So we might need conversational vocabulary, a general vocabulary, for instance. If we're that tertiary student in an academic program, we might need both that general vocabulary and an academic vocabulary, and perhaps a discipline-specific vocabulary too. And of course, another question that we're interested in is, what are the effective pedagogies for teaching vocabulary, for enhancing, improving vocabulary? What are the most effective? What are the most efficient to do that? One widely used pedagogy is extensive reading, and it's a newer kind of adaptation of that, extensive viewing. So ER is a widely used vocabulary pedagogy. It's not only about vocabulary, but that's one of its main uses. There are different ways to employ extensive reading in the classroom. One model that I'll probably kind of frame what I'm going to talk about this evening is self-selection and reading for pleasure. So you have an array of books to choose from. You choose what interests you and you simply read it for pleasure. It does not necessarily have to come with comprehension questions after it, or tests, or be monitored. It's simply reading what you enjoy, what you choose to read. Another key feature of ER is it consists of a large amount of comprehensible input. So the books that are read in this pedagogy are not too hard to understand. You have enough vocabulary to understand what's going on in the text, follow the narrative, follow what the characters are doing. It's a prolonged pedagogy, so the duration, it could be 6 months, could be 12 months, could be years. And the focus is not on necessarily learning vocabulary. The focus is on meaning, it's on comprehension, just understanding the text and enjoying the text. The text, typically what you want is difficulty slightly above current proficiency. So if you read a text and you know every word in that book, that's probably good for things like improving fluency, but developing your vocabulary, moving to a larger vocabulary size, what you want is a slightly more difficult text, a little bit above what you can currently, fully read, fully understand. Okay, EV, extensive viewing, is all of those things also, except with multimodal input. So it's kind of new on the scene, but a very interesting pedagogy too. There's a lot of good research is being done, and it has added benefits of visual input, auditory input, and there's some very interesting work being done with subtitles on top of that, on top of that visual and auditory input. So I'll talk a little bit about incidental and intentional learning here. Incidental learning is vocabulary acquired within a meaning-focused task, for example, reading comprehension. It relies on a few things. Repetition is particularly key, so meeting a word in context multiple times can lead to incidental learning. And there's other features too, like how salient that word is, how much you need it for comprehension, and engagement also. So how engaged are you with the text? How much do you want to understand what's going on? It's important to understand, particularly for the modeling research that I'm going to be talking about in a moment, that there's no number that equals acquisition. So you know, we talk about in the models that follow 12 repetitions, 20 repetitions. Well, these are just proxies. There's no exact number that will guarantee incidental learning for every single word, but the research record suggests that a fairly safe bet is between 2 and 20 repetitions within comprehensible input. That means 95 to 98% of the surrounding vocabulary should be known, and that way you can extract meaning of unknown words from context, because words tend to pattern with definitional words that relate to its meaning. And then that's the concept of collocation that we know from corpus linguistics. Intentional learning usually contrasts with incidental learning, and this is perhaps direct instruction. It could be teaching off word lists. It could be doing word attack strategies, like down in the corner here with the word finest, come up with a definition, come up with a synonym, this kind of thing. They could be teacher selected words, such as in the 3 tiers model of Beck and McCullough. I like this quote by Gallagher. So consideration of whether instruction is explicit or incidental is important given the time constraints teachers face. So if we can potentially partition off a good deal of vocabulary instruction to a pedagogy such as extensive reading or extensive viewing, that would be fantastic, because there's only so much class time. And we have only so much class time for direct instruction too. So if a wide general reading can do the job, that would be particularly helpful for teachers and learners also. Now back to that point I raised earlier, how much and what type of vocabulary do we need? We might break it up like this. We need a general vocabulary. This is the foundation for grammar, phonology, comprehension, particularly comprehension. We may also need an academic vocabulary. If you're in the school context or the tertiary context, that becomes particularly important. In fact, it becomes particularly important from, say, about grade 5 onward. You start to encounter a lot of academic words, so you do have to master that. And you might also need a discipline-specific vocabulary. This is words associated with biology or physics or mathematics. These provide conceptual knowledge. These are important for disciplinary literacy, for performing well in a particular subject, for understanding the texts you encounter in those subjects. And so here's an example of some of those words, the famous academic word list in the left here from Coxhead. We might call that a general academic vocabulary. Then there's the discipline-specific words. This is from some work I did called the secondary vocabulary list a few years ago, and I believe these are the biology words, high-frequency, well-distributed words in high school biology textbooks. And the general vocabulary, well, that might just be the most frequent, most frequent, say 4,000 to 5,000 words of the English language, perhaps. But it's just a ballpark kind of figure. Okay, now getting into the corpus modeling. So McCullough asked, and I love this this title here, Harry Potter and the Prisoners of Vocabulary Instruction, Acquiring Academic Language at Hogwarts. He asked, what if we looked at a corpus of juvenile fiction, books like Harry Potter, and saw if there was a possibility that we could learn academic words just from reading these texts, right? We don't have to we rely on direct instruction for them. We don't have to necessarily read academic texts. We'll just read things we enjoy, like Harry Potter, Twilight, Hunger Games, and we'll look at the occurrences and the repetitions of words from the AWL in this data set. So McCullough got together a corpus, 22 novels, about 1 million words, and he computed in this data set how many AWL targets were in there. And he also asked how many of these were repeated 10 times, 12 times, 25 times. And these are rates associated with incidental learning in previous literature. Then to develop a time estimate, a model of how long it would take to meet these academic words at the rates associated with incidental learning. He said, okay, if reading for 1 hour a day at 150 words per minute, how many academic words might you get, and in what time? Little synopsis of the results here, rather promising results. 484 of the 570 AWL targets, so about 85%, occurred in the juvenile fiction ER corpus that McCullough put together. So there's a lot of them in there. That's good news, good news number one. In terms of a time estimate, within a year, based on those modeling assumptions I introduced in the previous slide, you could get from 20% to 37% of the AWL at rates associated with incidental learning, depending on the number of repetitions that were targeted, right? 10, 20, 12, that kind of thing. But it ranges. That's a fairly substantial amount within a year. Basically, how much you might paraphrase that as saying you could partition off 20 to 37% of the AWL to extensive reading of juvenile fiction, books like Harry Potter, in under a year. So that's an interesting result, I think, quite promising. Then with extensive viewing, I think this is a great study by Dang also. Dang looked at medical TV and asked the question, what about discipline-specific vocabulary? Okay, McCullough's done some work on general academic vocabulary there. So what Dang did is extracted vocabulary, built a medical word list basically from lectures in that particular discipline, and also collected a big corpus of medical scripted TV shows like Grey's Anatomy and others that I'm not so sure about. But a big corpus there, 11 million words of these scripts, about 2,000 TV episodes, and developed a model also, right? I think it was 5 repetitions, how much input from this data, from how much extensive viewing would have to happen to meet these medical vocabulary words 5 times, 10 times, 15 times, 20 times. There's a lot of data, a lot of findings in that paper, so I can't do it the justice it deserves, and I certainly recommend it to the group here this evening to read. But some of the findings here, just to give a summary. So if you were to view all episodes, 99% of that discipline-specific medical vocabulary occurs more than 20 times. That might take a while, a few years, I think, when I run the numbers. But it certainly is there, and it occurs a lot. And then when you play with the parameters of the model a little bit, say you watch a few seasons, well, 76% of that medical word list occurs 5 times, 66% 10 times, 56% 20 times. So again, that's a very exciting finding, and it shows great potential for incidental learning through extensive viewing of self-selected, pleasurable material related to your disciplinary training. So then I thought, okay, why don't you have a go, Clarence, see what you can come up with. So I thought, all right, I'm going to take the AWL and the secondary vocabulary list that I developed a few years ago. These are discipline-specific lists, particularly for high school students or lower tertiary. Biology, physics, history, geography, mathematics, and 1 or 2 others, right? So an array of disciplinary specific word lists in that project. So I thought, okay, which of these might we be able to partition off to extensive reading or extensive viewing? Like, which ones occur at rates associated with incidental learning? So this is a bit different because I wasn't just looking at disciplinary related EV, medical shows, medical word lists, or juvenile fiction. I thought, well, what about just general extensive viewing of anything of interest, and general ER too, just general fiction, not juvenile fiction, not a particular genre. I asked a few questions that I put into the model. How much input is required to meet these targets 6 times, 12 times, 20 times, and how long is that going to take? To answer the how long question, I had to enter multiple reading rates, and these are based off previous research. So slower readers maybe around 100 words per minute, 260. Roughly the average 350 for faster readers, real quite fast up there on the bell curve. And the viewing rates, these were actually the speech rates, right? How fast people talk in television and movies. And these rates are 80 at the low end, 140 on average, and 200 words per minute at the higher end. So things like news, for example, can be very fast in the delivery. I just extracted the ER corpus and EV corpus, as I called them, from COCA. So 21 million words of COCA general fiction, and it's pretty pulp fiction stuff in COCA. Da Vinci Code, a Diary of a South Beach Party Girl. So just general fiction, bestsellers, that kind of thing. The EV corpus, just COCA movies. I extracted all that data. The TV included things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, scripts for Mission Impossible, some Fox News, CNN Showbiz, this kind of thing. So big kind of general corpora from the COCA for this. Here's a little synopsis of what I found here. So how to read this. All right, we'll just look at the ER data or extractive data here. So on the left at the top, we have some AWL words: apparent, investigate, and so forth. Now, in this data computed in the ER corpus, to meet apparent 12 times, it seems that you'd need probably about 136,000 words of input to get that word 12 times. How long does that take if you're reading at 100 words a minute? Not too long, actually. 22 hours is what the figure turned out. So, 1 hour a day, if you're reading at that, it's not particularly long. And so I got this for, all of the AWL words and all of the discipline-specific words. The discipline-specific words are, they tend to be lower frequency. So you can see the bottom left, some examples from biology, muscular intensity. You need more input there. So 740,000 words of input. So, quite a bit of reading there, but not a crazy amount of reading. 123 hours might be possible, a possible time frame to meet intensity 12 times. Okay, so what's a little summary of that? What did I take away from this? The AWL is fairly well attested. It was all there in general extensive reading and general extensive viewing. And under 3 years, the model suggests if you've got input of about 45 to 60 minutes a day, at 100 words per minute, let's say, you're going to meet about 93% of the AWL more than 12 times. And if you look at some of the other other rates, the other models, higher words per minute in your input, naturally you're going to get more coverage and sooner. An interesting result I also found was that EV takes longer because the input is slower. People read faster than speech on television and film, generally speaking. But the results are largely similar in terms of attestation, so the vocabulary that is in there. So EV, I guess, a way to express that might be, it doesn't look particularly impoverished. I was quite surprised that there's a lot of rich vocabulary available through extensive viewing. With the disciplinary specific vocabulary, I mean, it's not as well covered as the general AWL, but perhaps around 40 to 60% of that, according to the model, could have sufficient encounters for incidental learning or probability of incidental learning. And again, within 1 to 3 years of input at 45 to 60 minutes a day. So thumbs up, I thought that's not bad. That looks promising, Okay, so the corpus model seemed to suggest that all right, wide reading, extensive viewing might actually be a very good source for academic vocabulary and discipline-specific vocabulary. That's kind of our interim summary. So what about an entire functional vocabulary? How far can it do that job? And that's where we'll move into now. Now, the past 15 years, thereabouts, there have been a series of excellent and influential corpus modeling studies that have tackled this question. And the question is, can you approximate general English proficiency? Can you get there through ER, or can ER do the entire job, or can it do most of it, right? How far can incidental learning get you just through reading? Okay, and so, and what does what general English proficiency? How do we operationalize that? Well, again, as I said at the start of the talk, it depends on what you need to use English for. But let's say it's about 9,000 word families, and that's a figure that is out there in the literature, out there in the research, and that suggests that figure's there because that figure tends to cover about 95 to 98% of most texts, right, on average. So 9,000 word families gives you pretty good coverage, and that coverage is typically recommended for comprehension, and that's based off a few studies about 20 years ago, particularly by Paul Nation. This has come to be known actually in the past few years as the coverage comprehension model. So what you want for comprehension is about 95 to 98% coverage, minimum 95, optimal is 98. And if you know 95 to 98% of the words on a page, you're probably going to be able to comprehend it fairly well. And when you get to 9,000 word families, then you can, everything should be around, not everything, not like dense technical papers in physics, of course, but most things should be covered at that threshold. Okay, all right, so let's move on and see where this takes us. All right, so to model if incidental learning can get us to this 9,000 word target, just to see if it's feasible, right? Corpus studies are not intervention studies. What needs to be shown is that there are books with 95 to 98% vocabulary coverage out there for different vocabulary sizes from beginner to proficient, right? So if you've got a 5,000 word vocabulary size, there has to be a substantial amount of books that you can read out there, and the same for a 4,000 and a 7,000 vocabulary size, right? So that needs to be tested, and corpus linguistics can do that. Yeah, okay, and that's another way of expressing this point too. There has to be enough of these books for self-selection at the right level. So if you've got a 4,000 word vocabulary size, you need an array of books, a lot of available books, because a lot of them are not going to interest you, right? And a part of ER is about choosing what interests you, because that's compelling, that's comprehensible, compelling, comprehensible input, right? And that is ideal for games, optimal input, I believe Krashen calls it. The word targets, so those 9,000 words in this case, they need to be associated with the rates that have been identified in the incidental learning literature. And again, there's no guaranteed rate, but there's a lot of experimental work that these models tap into when they build their simulations. Also, the input, the number of words needs to be reasonable, and the time frames needs to be reasonable. So if it takes, 10 years to meet something 6 times, well, then that's perhaps, rather unreasonable to say, that's a pro for ER to get you to the 9,000 word vocabulary. Now, all right, I said that corpus modeling is not, they are not intervention studies, but they are very powerful. So I still want to communicate that to you, because if modeling can't show some of these above points, then claims that ER might do the entire job or even most of it can be falsified, probably through corpus linguistics without real world testing. If corpus linguists demonstrate that, okay, the vocabulary in a representation of ER is not repeated or absent, then this means that we know that ER is limited and won't take us to a functional vocabulary. You need other pedagogies. We know the limits of ER. Okay, so we'll go through some of the major studies that have happened over these past 15 years. And Cobb, 2007 was the first, what I would say is the first major study here, picked up again in a later paper. So what did Cobb do? He set a threshold of 6 encounters for incidental learning, you know, probability of incidental learning. And he took a random sample from B and C lists, words from the first 1,000 most frequent words of the BNC, the second most frequent, the third most frequent 1,000 words. He computed the number of repetitions of this sample in the Brown corpus in a fiction, press, academic. So this is kind of the model of extensive reading. Right, computed the occurrences of the word families of the targets from those BNC lists. And again, there's a lot of rich data that I can't fully do justice in a quick presentation, but the results show things like this. At the 1,000 level, all but 1 to 2 words were at this incidental learning threshold. No 3,000 words were, and only 1 2,000 level word was. With 300, oh, sorry, a follow-up study in this same paper just took a follow-up study in the same paper took some Jack London novels of 300,000 words thereabout, analyzed this data, and the results indicated that well, for the 3,000 level, for example, so words in that 3,000 level band, there were only about 469 that were repeated 6 or more times. So the majority were under incidental learning threshold. So that to me is a, and then to Cobb is a thumbs down for ER, and Cobb concludes this kind of model shows the extreme unlikelihood of developing an adequate L2 reading lexicon through reading alone, even in highly favorable circumstances. So that was on the no side for ER. Nation followed it up a few years later with there's quite a lot in this study too. It's a fantastic study. Nation took from Project Gutenberg about 25 novels, Animal Farm, Gatsby, these kind of things, and also the BNC COCA lists. So you know, first 1,000 most frequent words of English is in one list. Then the second list is the second most frequent 1,000 words of English, and so forth. And there's many lists like that, but we're only interested in the first 9,000 lists, you know, for the present purposes, right? In the model that Nation developed, he looked at a threshold of 12 encounters. Again, based on, you know, experimental research that's reviewed in that paper, and he modeled the reading input, reading speeds input of 150 words per minute and 200 words per minute. So basically what he did was say, okay, how much of my corpus, you know, how many books, how much of my corpus has to be read to meet the first 1,000 words, you know, on an average of 12 times, and then how much more has to be read to meet the next 1,000 words on an average of 12 times, and so on and so forth until you get an average 12 times for the 9,000 word family band. So that was the way it was modeled, and Nation reports the results in summary. If learners read a total of 3 million word tokens, they would meet the first 9,000 words often enough to have a chance of learning them. What is the time estimate for this? Well, a later paper, Nation clarifies that perhaps it's something like 1,000 words a year through reading. Could be possible, you know, under you know, very favorable circumstances. So 1,000 words a year, thereabout. In this study, also in that corpus, the Gutenberg corpus, an issue was flagged, and that was that for mid-range vocabulary sizes, there were not a lot of texts that were aligned with that comprehension coverage model that I mentioned. So, you know, if you had a vocabulary size of, say, 4,000 words or 5,000 words, there weren't really a lot of books that could be read with 95 to 98% coverage there. So that's a problem in terms of a pathway, right? Reading, you've got a small vocabulary size, you're reading at one level, you need a comprehensible pathway to get to the next level and then continue into the 9,000 word target. So Nation suggested, well, mid-frequency graded readers are going to be an important part of an extensive reading program, given that corpus finding. But overall, Nation concludes, as you can see there, a largely positive study of the opportunities for learning through input. So a thumbs up, but a little bit of we're not so sure about a few things, such as the presence of the presence of books in the mid range vocabulary size. Okay, McCullough followed up. This is a different study now than the academic one. It was a corpus of juvenile fiction, again, Twilight, Hunger Games, these kind of texts, Sweet Valley High, I believe. Quick synopsis of the results. Many were readable, 95 to, typo there, that should be 98%, within the mid-frequency vocabulary size ranges. So that's good. Hunger Games was readable with 95% coverage at 4,000 words, actually. So that's a different finding that contrasts with the prior study we looked at. Remodeling, McCullough remodeled Nation's figures at 1 hour a day, 12 repetitions. And to jump to the conclusion, he finds there's sufficient input at each step of the way. All at Nations recommended 98% vocabulary coverage. And the estimate given is perhaps a little over 3 years of reading could take readers all the way to the 9,000 word family level. So that's a positive conclusion for the power, for how far ER might get you in terms of building a fully functional vocabulary, general proficiency. Okay, again, I thought, why not have a shot, Clarence? See what you can find. I took 11 million words, about 5,000 books, again from COCA. I ran them through AntWord Profiler, and I asked how many of these books are readable at 95% coverage of vocabulary for each of the BNC COCA lists. So, for example, I was saying, how many of these books can be read with 3,000 words, the first 3 lists of the BNC COCA? How many, can be read with the 4,000, the first 4 lists, the first 5 lists for 5,000 word vocabulary size, that kind of thing. Then I partitioned these off and created sub-corpora that were theoretically at the right level, aligned with the CCM, coverage comprehension model, for different vocabulary sizes. I modeled using 12 encounters also, a minimum of 12 encounters. I looked at it this way. I said, how much reading has to be done in these right level corpora to reach 12 encounters of words from the next level up, and then subsequent levels also, right? 150 words per minute, 60 minutes per day. I plugged that into the simulation. And okay, the first thing I found here is, I think the main column kind of tells the story here. The number of books that can be read, at least certainly once you get to a 3,000 level. So that means you have a 3,000 word vocabulary size, for example. Out of all the books in this data set, you could probably read about 1,900, about 2,000 of them, right? And then the more you go up, your vocabulary develops, of course, more books become accessible to you. So other than with the smallest vocabulary sizes where you might want to go through graded readers for that, there seems to be authentic fiction in those mid-frequency bands, and probably enough that you wouldn't have to pick up and put down too many books to find one that you can read. So sufficient input does seem to be out there, at least judged by the corpus I use, the COCA corpus. This is the time model, the model that represents how long and how much input is required to meet the majority of words from the next level up, the next vocabulary size up 12 times. On the kind of, one of the assumptions here is once you meet them enough times, meet the majority of the next level words, then you can progress to reading at the next level. So you go from a 3,000 level reader to a 4,000 level reader, this kind of thing. So how to read this? What does this show? So let's say you're starting at a you're starting your ER, beginning to read 1 hour a day. You've got a 2,000 word vocabulary size. So the model suggested, I'll just check my time here. Okay, all right. The model suggested probably you need about 4.5 million words of input, and at 150 words a minute, 1 hour a day, one year for 4.5 months there. And after you read that much, you would have met the 3K words, 800 of them, more than 12 times, and some of the others, several times also, right? Also, you would have met a lot of words, as you can see in the tail of this distribution, from the 4,000 level vocabulary size band, 5K, 6K, 7K. So that amount of reading, doesn't just take you to the 3K level. It gives you a lot of vocabulary from higher levels too, which I found quite surprising, that look, you're actually possibly acquiring, say, 307K words, even in these 2K books after reading for that long. There's an issue there. Why is that so long? 1 year, 4.5 months? Because the model assumes that you're not starting with any vocabulary, which is obviously not true, because there would be vocabulary, from 1,000 words and smaller vocabulary there, right? But you can't plug that into the model. So there's certainly that's an overestimate. But it's a reasonable starting point for the sake of the computational model. How do you read the rest of it? Well, what this means is the 6 months below the 1 year at the 3K level. So once you're reading at the 3K level, you've already acquired you've acquired 683 of those words needed to get from reading at the 3K to the 4K level while you were reading at the 2K level. So then to get from 683 to 800 of the 4K level while you're reading with the 300 word vocabulary size, you only need to read for about 6 more months to get those extra words. And while you're doing that, reading for 6 more months, you're adding to your 5K words, your 6K words, your 7K words, and so forth. And then you read for another 5 months, and you move up again. You hit the 80% of the next band, and so forth. So that's kind of how the model works. Verbally, it is perhaps easier explained. So the model shows that about 6.3 years of extensively reading 1 hour a day might be a way to get from the 2K level to the 9K level, reading at about 150 words per minute. So this is less than nation's estimate. 9 years if it were 1,000 words per year. I don't think that's probably accurate. I think it would probably be more around 7 years, because I would assume, I don't want to I would assume Nation would suggest going into an ER program after you have the first 2,000 words or something like that. But either way, it's a little bit less than that. It's more than the estimate of 3 years by McCullough, but I mean, if you're reading for 2 hours a day, then yes, it's 3.5 years. Like McCullough found in his study of juvenile fiction, there's certainly evidence in this corpus model for a pathway through comprehensible input. So reading at the right level for your current vocabulary size. In contrast to Cobb, it does seem that the ER repetition is at incidental learning rates beyond, the first few thousand words. So overall, what are the insights from corpus linguistics that I'd like to share? Well, corpus approaches to ER and EV provide strong support for the value of extensive reading and extensive viewing. This corpus work suggests academic vocabulary is highly likely to be incidentally learned from general pleasure reading and viewing. Extensive viewing appears to be rich in the input that it offers, along with similar to extensive reading. So that's perhaps surprising that television and film does have such a rich vocabulary. With access to books, now that's important. You need access to a library for a lot of these models' assumptions to work. Comprehensible input at the right level is available. It is out there in Corpora that we construct to represent extensive reading. Also interesting, corpus linguistics shows more advanced vocabulary occurs in comprehensible input for smaller vocabulary sizes. You get quite advanced vocabulary there, and of course, as I mentioned, academic and discipline-specific vocabulary. So can ER do most of the job, i.e. get a student to 9,000 words? Well, corpus models don't rule it out anyway. So I said before that, look, there's some stipulations in this kind of work, and if corpus models find negative evidence that some of these don't hold up in the data sets, well, then it would be ruled out. As far as I can tell, the corpus models don't rule it out at this point in time, at this point in the research. But of course, modeling has limitations, and we can talk about that in the question time if you'd like. But thanks for bearing with me. I think that's all. My timing, not too bad. So, thanks.
Thanks so much, Clarence. As usual, you can't hear the applause. The applause is definitely happening, though. That's for sure. It's certainly in my room. I've been applauding on mute, so you couldn't hear it, but it was happening. Thanks for a wonderful talk. We've got some really good questions that have come through in the chat. And given that I think it's now 11 o'clock in the evening for you, I'll get straight into them so as to spare you an even later night.
Thank you.
So, okay, question from Juan Solano Cardenas. The question is, as these gains in vocabulary result from passive sources, so it's reading and listening, to what degree would they represent an impact in production skills in the long run, if at all?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I'd just be speculating, but I think the the research tends to suggest receptive vocabulary before productive vocabulary, right? So I think you want to solve a base in receptive. That doesn't mean you should not focus on productive outputs either. But it's a research question that needs measurement. So I can't I can't say off the top of my head that I know the answer to that, but it's a legitimate research question. Yeah.
Thanks, Clarence. So from Paula, the question is, have any of the studies that you've cited in today's talk observed reading comprehension and vocabulary acquisition directly from extended concordance lines? So yeah, you mentioned before a corpus study can't be an intervention study, but in some cases it can. If you're giving people direct access to corpus data and presumably seeing if comprehension and acquisition occurs from that. So do you know, have any of those studies done that, or do you know of any studies that have looked at that?
I certainly know a great scholar at the University of Queensland who is all over this area. I think there was some. I think Avril Coxhead and some of her collaborators have done some comprehension coverage model work based on concordance lines, actually.
Yeah, they have.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I think that's out there. I can't remember the reference off the top of my head, but I think if you follow the reference trail of Avril Coxhead, you should find a few of those studies.
Yeah, it's pretty recent. I'll try and find that one for you, Paula, and send you an email later. Got a question now from Pavel Sudarsky. So hello, Pavel. It's good to see you again. He says, this is a great talk which shows the power of corpora for studying the learning of vocabulary. He agrees with Clarence that the required number of encounters with words is just a proxy because vocab learning is not only about exposure, but also the level or depth of engagement with words. So this leads him to his question. How can we ensure that we increase the amount of exposure both through reading and viewing that second language learners who may not read that much in their second language? So is it through, you've used TV, what about things like multimedia or apps, computer assisted reading? Where can the input come from?
Yeah,
if they're not reading. In my own experience, students, in particularly EFL learners, do have trouble sitting down to read.
Yeah, no, I agree, and EV has been posited as one way to do that, right? And that extensive viewing can be YouTube videos. I think Krashen's correct in that you want it to be compelling, right? So if it's an ER program based on, say, graded readers that not everybody might be interested in looks very different to an ER program where you source the student gets to read whatever they want. It's graphic novels. It's something really that they want to understand, want to enjoy, want to get pleasure out of. So I think that is, that model of ER might speak to that question, to encourage students to read more. If you want to read a Spider-Man comic, go for it, if it's comprehensible input. And yeah, extensive viewing could be a possibility there. Podcasts that interest you, extensive listening, that kind of thing. But yeah, there's no easy solution in any educational sphere about how to get students to read more. That's certainly true.
It's tough. I think my kids probably learn most of their vocabulary to date by reading Pokemon books.
Pokemon. Well, that'll do the
That's
job,
just
right? If it's
that's you
right.
find an interest and then you just run with it, honestly.
No.
So yeah, get your students to read more Pokemon. Question from Roberto Cabado in the Philippines.
Mm.
What were any challenges that you encountered in undertaking this study? And do you have any kind of recommendations about how to avoid such challenges?
I mean, challenges are, deciding on what your modeling assumptions are, because there's you're trying to understand something better. But the thing about models, any computational model, is it's a simplification of real world behavior, right? So you have to make multiple decisions to simplify behavior, like incidental learning, right? It's not really 12, it's not really 20. The CCM, the coverage comprehension, it's not really 95, it's not really 98. It's just it's a correlation, like the Schmidt paper a few years ago. But you have to plug numbers in, you have to plug things in to get your model to work. And these are legitimate, but you also struggle because you know that they're imperfect and they bring noise into the outcome, right?
Mm.
So there's no easy solution in our field or any field that does
Yeah.
these kind of
I
models.
think you only have to look at COVID modeling, right? As a really good kind of 21st century example of modeling that can be sometimes right and sometimes can be just completely way off because there's so much noise involved in the data, right?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, more, yeah. I mean, more complex models, should take into account much more than repetition. Contextual diversity and part of speech and type of word. These have different learning probabilities. So there's, but yeah. So there's things left out. There's simplifications, and that's yeah.
Totally. Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Roberto. Question from Nicolina now. Do you know of corpus studies that focus on graded readers? If yes, do you know what the findings were?
To I
I remember there was
Yeah,
something.
yeah. No, there's quite a few. I mean, Paul Nation has done some work on graded readers,
Yes.
mid-frequency graded readers also. There's certainly quite a few intervention studies on graded readers. Corpus modeling on graded readers, not off the top of my head, actually, not off the top of my head. But it's certainly out there. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we've got a question from Abdul Wahid. The question is, what's your advice based on your research to institutions that still teach vocabulary as separate courses to EFL learners using exclusively textbooks such as English vocabulary in use? And we know that these schools are out there and that these teachers are out there doing this. What's your advice to people who study or work in such context?
Oh, my advice is try some extensive reading. I think that would be perhaps more valuable. So, yeah.
Short answer. Yeah, I can agree with that. Question then from Adriane. She's researched collocations for over 20 years. Many researchers and myself support the intentional learning of second language collocations. What's your opinion about that? Have you reflected on or investigated incidental or intentional learning of collocations?
No, I haven't researched that. I mean, with the secondary vocabulary lists, though, I generated all the collocations for those targets. Because I think that's valuable, because like I said in that talk, incidental learning kind of works through extracting information from collocations, right? The semantics, I mean, it's Sinclair's observation, right? At the beginning of all of this, that you meaning is distributed and you extract meaning for unknown words through collocation. So I think collocations are absolutely important. The more knowledge you have of them can only benefit incidental learning or vocabulary acquisition more generally. I'm certainly I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Got a question then from Abdul Nazar. Thinking about corpus modeling for discipline-specific vocabulary, it comes up with the example of teaching tourism vocabulary for college students. So typically, to form professional competence, how many words might somebody need?
For tourism vocabulary?
That was the example they gave, but I guess a lot of these sub-disciplines like tourism would be quite similar, I suppose, and maybe perhaps in terms of having a vocabulary range that you would need to acquire. So what's your take on that?
Well, I guess the answer would be you'd need to take a corpus approach, right? Perhaps get some data that represents the reading needs, the communicative needs in that professional space of tourism, and then compute the types of words and how many words are needed. You know, say for 95 to 98% of that data set, and you might say, okay, this number of words and of these words will align with the coverage comprehension model for tourism. That might be one approach, but you know, it's getting late here, so let me
Okay, I've got one more question for you then, Clarence, before we wrap up for today. Questions from Tuba. Question is regarding second language extensive viewing in Corpora. How were you able to translate the EV for second languages in terms of movies or TV series? For example, were there any subtitles being provided?
Yes, it's all so Coca. They're all closed captions and subtitles, I believe, that goes into that data set. So in a way, Coca is not real speech, or it is real speech, but it's different, I believe, to the way the BNC was created, which is transcription. So it's that's essentially what it is, actually, subtitles and closed captions, if I understand the corpus sampling.
Well, thanks very much, Clarence. We are going to finish here for today. Just before we do, I'm just going to bring up the details of next week's talk. And we have, very pleased to have with us, I'm just going to share my screen here with you a second to get that going. We've got Anne O'Keefe, senior lecturer from University of Limerick, Ireland. The Routledge Corpus Linguistic Guides and the Routledge Handbook of Applied Corpus Linguistics. And so a huge publication that has just come out together with Professor Michael McCarthy. So yeah, we're very honored to have Anne with us next week, and I hope to see as many of this wonderful audience who tuned in tonight for Clarence's talk. Hope to see as many of you there next week for that talk as well. Same place, same time. But for now, let's thank Clarence. He's just passed, I think, 11:15 in the evening, so now he can take a well-deserved break. But it was another fascinating seminar, and just thanks so much for taking the time to come and talk with our audience today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, and thank you everybody for coming. It was great to be here. So, merci. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. See you.
That's inspiring talk.